Hello everyone, this is Professor Hasselman, and in today's lecture for History 107, we're going to be talking about contemporary cultural change. Now, many people changed or significantly adapted their belief systems in the 20th century. In this sense, the contemporary period can be compared to the post-classical period, the last era of fairly systematic cultural change. There were also connections between cultural and political change. Several factors pushed for cultural change: new levels of contact among societies, including the impact of returning immigrants, rapid urbanization, and active missionary activity by leaders eager to convey new political attachments or simply to sell consumer goods. It's also clear that directions of change were complex and a great deal of resistance developed, particularly from the 1970s onward. Even more than change, then, cultural contest, both among and within societies, describes the contemporary period to date. Three ideologies gained ground, particularly during the first three quarters of the 20th century, and often at the expense of traditional religious beliefs: nationalism, Marxism, and liberal humanitarianism. These three belief systems were quite different, often opposed in principle, though open to combination in practice. They also shared key features. They were secular, they pointed to progress on this earth, and they usually urged a new level of faith in science. But there were other cultural claimants as well, particularly among religions. In Africa, for example, the spread of Christianity and Islam defined the most important cultural changes, though consumerism and nationalism also spread to a degree. Latin America saw a variety of new religious enthusiasms, most recently Protestant evangelicalism. More important still, the rise of religious fundamentalisms from the 1970s onward added tremendous complexity to the world's cultural map, dividing loyalties within such regions as India, the United States, and the Middle East, and sometimes dividing loyalties within families or individuals. The contemporary period has seen massive cultural change in most parts of the world. In a sense, it might be compared to the post-classical period, or the medieval period, as we often say in Western civilization. If you look at the dominant cultural systems of most parts of the world around 1900, we see the continued hold of the world religions. If we fast forward to a century later, the hold of the religions has been qualified, and the cultural map has become more complex. Although there was no global agreement on a new political system, there was wide agreement that the old systems no longer worked. The same is not true for culture. In this arena, we see significant cultural contestation and competition within and among regions and even within individuals. There are several reasons to see the contemporary period in terms of cultural change, including new migration patterns, massive urbanization, and active missionary efforts for one or more new kinds of beliefs. In addition, each of the revolutions of the contemporary period attacked older cultural systems in favor of new commitments. Now, three main competitors emerged for cultural allegiance in the contemporary period, none of which was entirely new. The first entrant was nationalism. As we saw earlier, nationalism praised tradition to some extent and could combine with older belief systems. Nationalism, however, tended to move people at least partially away from older religious formulations. Indian nationalism urged Indians to retain their old commitments to Hinduism or Islam, but to modify these with new views about social castes and class, gender, and politics. African nationalists attacked older polytheistic religious loyalties and introduced important social and political divisions. The most systematic competitor for cultural allegiance in the 20th century was Marxism, which has some elements of religion. Marxism argues that religion is explicitly wrong and that people should free themselves of it in preparation for the revolution. Marxism urges attention to scientific principle of history and to science itself, along with a commitment to materialism and the material forces that drive the historical process. Marxism urges commitment to principles of social equality and to new political formulations. In the hands of leaders in the 20th century, Marxism produced not only beliefs, but also martyrs, symbols, and rituals deliberately designed to compete with older religious forms. The third competitor for belief in the contemporary period has been called by anthropologists liberal humanitarianism. This belief system emphasizes three principal identities or commitments. The first of these is consumerism, a cultural system in which people gain part of their satisfaction and part of their personal and group identities from the process of consuming goods that they do not necessarily need. And this is something that Ferguson discusses in quite some detail in his book, Civilization, the West and the West. The West and the Rest as one of his 6 killer apps. Liberal humanitarianism involves a substantial commitment to science as a means of explaining the world around us and as the potential solution for many social and individual ills. Liberal humanitarianism involves a considerable degree of tolerance and cosmopolitanism, as well as a sense that other people and cultures offer opportunities for learning. Now, in challenging traditional beliefs, these three systems frequently challenged each other. Marx and Marxist leaders described nationalism as another cultural component that could mislead the working classes. And nationalists were frequently hostile to consumerism as an individualistic form of expression. Despite their differences, these systems also combined with one another and with older cultural values. For example, many Japanese consumerists living in a society that was increasingly secular continued to use some Buddhist rituals, and male Italian Marxists often had their children baptized, just in case. Now, these three belief systems shared some points in common. The three systems were secular. They all judged society and individuals in terms of activities in this world. The three systems were also, broadly speaking, progressive. They believed that society over time would become better if the national state gained ground as the communist revolution took hold or as standards of living rose. These belief systems tended to emphasize the goal of the individual to find greater satisfaction in his life rather than in the afterlife. And these systems had some commitment to science. Marx prided himself on the scientific qualities of his theories, and most nationalists urged attention to science to increase national strength. These cultural packages challenged the primary cultural identifiers of the world in 1900, but they have not yet dislodged older beliefs as clearly as new political systems dislodge their older counterparts. These cultural packages do not fit some key regions, most notably sub-Saharan Africa. This region has been the scene of massive cultural change in the contemporary period, with elements of Marxism, nationalism, and liberal humanitarianism. But the big cultural story in the 20th century sub-Saharan Africa has been the massive gains of Islam and Christianity among the populace. Latin America has also seen some interest in nationalism, Marxism, and liberal humanitarianism, but much of the cultural story of Latin America in the past half-century has been the increasing interest in Protestant fundamentalism. In the wake of the fall of Marxism in Eastern Europe and the reduction of Marxist cultural enthusiasm, people are once again open to new religious influences in both Russia and China. Now, a significant issue relating to these cultural belief systems involves the rise of religious fundamentalism, not only in Islam, but also in Western Christianity, Hinduism, Judaism, and Buddhism. Religious fundamentalism urges the transcendent importance of religious commitments and a religious cultural framework over the new forces of nationalism, Marxism, or liberal humanitarianism. Religious fundamentalists urge a return to an established body of religious truth, often involving strict moral codes and rearrangements of gender relationships. Religious fundamentalism typically involves innovation. Fundamentalists are adept at using technological devices to spread their message and win adherents. Many religions, under the spur of fundamentalism, become more intolerant than they had been traditionally. Many fundamentalists insist increasingly on the importance of gaining state support for their religious goals and beliefs. The rise of fundamentalism indicates a definite reaction to secular cultural alternatives and a reaction to the somewhat more tolerant approaches within a religion itself. It further suggests innovation, particularly in political policy and the uses of technology. So, why is fundamentalism gaining ground? Fundamentalism is a reassertion of real or imagined traditional identity against the cosmopolitan features of new cultural systems. Religious revivals reflect the fact that many of the new cultural systems fail to provide spiritual satisfaction. Religious fundamentalism has frequently appealed to social groups who find themselves left out of the benefits, real or imagined, of the modern world. The cultural collapse of Marxism may also be a factor. So, what are the results of these changes in cultural belief systems? One result is a certain degree of regional division. A few regions, such as Western Europe, seem largely content to remain secular. Their cultural change has reached a fairly uniform conclusion. Most parts of the world, however, have seen internal divisions and conflict among groups within the regions. We see such conflict between secular loyalties and leadership and religious enthusiasms in the Middle East, the United States, Latin America, and to some degree Africa. We do not know the end of the story of cultural change. We can, however, note the complexity that cultural divisions within and among regions add to the story of global politics and the future of world history. So this is the end of this lecture on cultural change in the 20th century, and this is History 107.